100 laws, not legal laws, conceptual laws, the kind that explain why your plans fall apart, why some people always seem to win, and why the world works the way it does. These are the 100 laws that top English learners and top thinkers should know. Stay with me until the end, because the last 10 might change how you see everything. Law 1, Murphy's Law. If something can go wrong, it will go wrong at the worst possible moment. It's not pessimism. It's a reminder to always build a backup plan. A surgeon who double-checks every instrument before an operation isn't being paranoid. They're applying Murphy's Law. Law 2, Finagle's Corollary. Murphy's Law upgraded. Anything that goes wrong will do so in the most damaging way possible. It's the universe punishing overconfidence. The one email you forget to proofread is always the one that goes to your most important client. Law 3, Hofstadter's Law. Everything takes longer than you expect, even when you account for this law. The recursive nature of it captures how humans are wired to be optimistic about time. Every software project in history has shipped late, even the ones that budgeted for delays. Law 4, Parkinson's Law. Work expands to fill the time available for its completion. Give yourself a week for a task that needs 2 hours, and it will somehow consume the entire week. Students who have 2 weeks to write an essay somehow always finish the night before it's due. Law 5, the Peter Principle. In any hierarchy, people rise to the level of their own incompetence. A brilliant engineer gets promoted to manager, a role that needs entirely different skills, and suddenly performs poorly. Organizations are quietly full of people who were excellent one level below where they currently sit. Law 6, Sturgeon's Law. 90% of everything is crud. Theodore Sturgeon said it to defend science fiction, but it applies everywhere, to YouTube videos, to business ideas, to advice you receive. The job is to search relentlessly for the 10% that isn't. Law 7, Hanlon's razor. Never attribute to malice what can be adequately explained by stupidity. Most bad outcomes come from negligence, not conspiracy. Before assuming someone is out to get you, ask whether a simple mistake explains it just as well. Law 8, the Dunning-Kruger effect. People with limited knowledge in a domain tend to overestimate their own competence, while genuine experts often underestimate theirs. A beginner chess player who wins 2 games thinks they're a prodigy. A grandmaster still studies for 8 hours a day. Law 9, Campbell's Law. When a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. Schools that teach only to standardized tests produce students who score well but think poorly. The metric gets gamed. The purpose gets lost. Law 10, Goodhart's Law. Any statistical regularity will collapse once pressure is applied to it for control. Banks that are judged purely on loan volume will issue bad loans. Optimize the number, lose the meaning behind it. Law 11, the Pareto Principle. Roughly 80% of outcomes come from 20% of causes. 20% of customers generate 80% of revenue. 20% of your study habits produce 80% of your progress. Find that 20% and double down on it. Law 12, the Power Law. Small changes in input can produce exponentially large changes in output. One viral video can generate more views than a creator's previous 100 combined. This is why consistency matters. You're always one piece of work away from a step change. Law 13, Metcalfe's Law. The value of a network is proportional to the square of its users. A telephone with 1 user is worthless. With 1 million users, it becomes essential infrastructure. This is why social platforms become harder to leave the more people join them. Law 14. Moore's Law. Computing power roughly doubles every 2 years while cost halves. It's the engine behind the smartphone in your pocket being more powerful than a 1990s supercomputer. Though the rate is slowing, it still describes the exponential arc of the digital age. Law 15. Zipf's Law. In any language, the most common word appears roughly twice as often as the second most common, 3 times as often as the third, and so on. This power law distribution also appears in city populations, wealth, and website traffic, a reminder that natural systems tend toward concentration, not equality. If you're finding these useful, consider subscribing. There are 85 more laws coming, and each one is sharper than the last. Law 16. The long tail. In digital markets, the combined sales of niche products can exceed those of bestsellers. A specialty podcast about medieval architecture may never have millions of listeners, but its loyal audience is deeply engaged. The internet made niches viable. Law 17. Gall's Law. All complex systems that work evolved from simpler systems that worked. Trying to design a complex system from scratch almost always fails. The internet didn't emerge from a master plan. It grew from a simple packet switching protocol. Law 18. Conway's Law. Organizations produce systems that mirror their own communication structure. A company with siloed departments builds software with siloed components. If you want better products, fix the org chart first. Law 19. Amara's Law. We overestimate the impact of technology in the short run and underestimate it in the long run. Every decade has its AI hype cycle, and every decade, something stranger and more powerful eventually arrives. Patience and long-term vision beat short-term excitement. Law 20. Worth's Law. Software gets slower faster than hardware gets faster. Your new laptop sometimes feels no quicker than your old one because the applications have bloated faster than the chips improved. Efficiency is a design choice, not a natural outcome. Law 21. The mere exposure effect. The more we encounter something, the more we tend to like it. This is why repeated advertising works, why familiar music feels comforting, and why spaced repetition in language learning builds genuine affection for new words. Familiarity breeds not contempt, but fondness. Law 22. Confirmation bias. People seek, favor, and remember information that confirms their existing beliefs. A scientist who falls in love with their hypothesis stops being a scientist and starts being an advocate. The cure is to actively seek evidence that proves you wrong. Law 23. The Baader-Meinhof phenomenon. Once you notice something new, you suddenly see it everywhere. You learn the word ephemeral and hear it 3 times the next day. Your brain's attention filter has been updated. The world hasn't changed. Only your perception has. Law 24. The halo effect. A positive impression in one area causes us to assume positive traits in unrelated areas. Attractive candidates get hired more often than equally qualified but less attractive ones. Aware of this, good interviewers score candidates on specific criteria before forming an overall impression. Law 25. The Streisand effect. Attempting to suppress information often causes it to spread far more widely. In 2003, Barbra Streisand sued to have a photo of her home removed from the internet. Before the lawsuit, it had been viewed 6 times. Afterwards, 500,000 times in a month. Law 26. Godwin's Law. As any online discussion grows longer, the probability of a comparison involving Hitler approaches 1. When someone reaches for that comparison, it usually signals that the argument has left reason behind entirely. Law 27. Bike shedding. Groups give disproportionate weight to trivial issues while ignoring complex ones. A committee will approve a hospital's new wing in minutes, but debate the color of the staff bicycle shed for an hour, because everyone can have an opinion on color, and few can evaluate structural engineering. Law 28. The Pygmalion effect. Higher expectations from others lead to better performance. Teachers who believe their students are gifted, even when assigned randomly, produce measurably better outcomes. Expectations become self-fulfilling prophecies, for better or worse. Law 29. The Hawthorne effect. People change their behavior when they know they are being observed. Factory workers produced more when researchers were present, regardless of what change was being tested. Being watched creates effort. Being unwatched reveals defaults. Law 30. The over-justification effect. Offering external rewards for an already enjoyable activity can destroy intrinsic motivation. Children who were paid to read books read less for pleasure after the payment stopped. Reward what needs encouraging. Don't reward what already runs on its own fuel. Law 31. Grice's maxims. Cooperative conversation follows 4 principles. Be truthful, be concise, be relevant, and be clear. Violating any of these, even subtly, creates confusion or unintended implication. The most common communication failures trace back to breaking one of these 4 rules. Law 32. Shannon's Law. The maximum rate at which information can be reliably transmitted over a channel is limited by its bandwidth and noise level. Every communication system, from radio to the internet to human conversation, obeys this fundamental ceiling. Reduce noise, increase signal. Law 33. Sayre's Law. In any dispute, the intensity of feeling is inversely proportional to the value of the stakes. Academic arguments are notoriously vicious because when the stakes are low, no one is forced to concede. The smaller the prize, the bigger the fight. Law 34. The Gell-Mann amnesia effect. You read a news article on a subject you know well. Notice how wrong it is. Then turn the page and trust the next article completely. On a subject you know nothing about. Named by Michael Crichton, it is the foundational argument for media skepticism. Law 35. Cunningham's Law. The fastest way to get the correct answer on the internet is not to ask a question. It's to post the wrong answer. Someone will always rush to correct you. It's a provocateur's research strategy that genuinely works. You're almost halfway through. If you want to go deeper on any of these laws, subscribe and leave a comment. I read every one. Law 36. Poe's Law. Without a clear marker of intent, online extremism and parody are completely indistinguishable. Any sufficiently extreme position will be mistaken for sincere belief by someone. This is why tone and context are not optional in written communication. Law 37. Brandolini's Law. The energy required to refute misinformation is an order of magnitude greater than the energy required to produce it. One confident false claim can spawn hours of careful debunking work. This asymmetry is why misinformation spreads faster than corrections. Law 38. The Overton window. At any given moment, there is a narrow range of ideas the public considers acceptable to discuss. Politicians don't lead opinion. They follow the window. Move the window first. Policy follows later. Law 39. Brooks' Law. Adding people to a late software project makes it later. New team members need onboarding, communication overhead multiplies, and the existing team slows down to bring newcomers up to speed. Sometimes the rescue team sinks the ship. Law 40, Linus's Law. Given enough eyes, all bugs are shallow. Open source software benefits from massive collective review. What one person misses, 10,000 others will catch. Transparency is a quality control strategy. Law 41, the law of unintended consequences. Every deliberate intervention produces at least one unforeseen side effect. Introducing cats to an island to control rats may wipe out the native bird population. Good intentions and bad outcomes are not mutually exclusive. Law 42, the Cobra effect. An incentive designed to solve a problem makes it worse. When British colonial authorities offered bounties for dead cobras to reduce the cobra population, locals began breeding cobras to collect the reward. The problem multiplied. Law 43, the butterfly effect. In complex systems, tiny initial differences can produce vastly different outcomes over time. A small variation in the angle of a billiard ball's first shot eventually makes the ball's 100th position completely unpredictable. Sensitivity to initial conditions is the fingerprint of complex systems. Law 44, the law of diminishing returns. Beyond a certain point, adding more input produces smaller and smaller additional output. Practice piano for 2 hours and you improve significantly. Practice for 12 hours and the last 4 produce almost nothing, and may even cause harm through fatigue. Law 45, Liebig's Law of the Minimum. Growth is constrained by the scarcest resource, not by the total of all resources available. A crop field with abundant water and sun, but depleted nitrogen will not grow, regardless of how much sun and water you add. Fix the bottleneck, not the surplus. Law 46, the Red Queen effect. In competitive systems, you must continuously evolve just to maintain your current position. Alice runs as fast as she can in Through the Looking Glass and stays in the same place, because everyone around her is running too. Standing still in a competitive field means falling behind. Law 47, Ashby's Law of Requisite Variety. Only variety can absorb variety. A control system must have at least as much complexity as the environment it tries to manage. A government that responds to every crisis with one blunt tool will fail against crises that require nuance. Law 48, the Matthew effect. Accumulated advantage accelerates. Those who have more tend to receive more. The paper that gets cited first gets cited most. The school with the best reputation attracts the best students, which strengthens the reputation further. Early advantage compounds. Law 49, Brace's paradox. Adding capacity to a network can reduce overall performance. In several real cities, closing a major road actually improved average traffic flow, because the new route had been causing a bottleneck that everyone individually rational chose, but collectively suffered from. Law 50, Jevons paradox. Increased efficiency in using a resource often leads to greater total consumption of it, not less. When steam engines became more efficient, coal consumption rose, because cheaper operation made coal economical for far more applications. Efficiency expands demand. Law 51, the adjacent possible. Innovation rarely leaps to radically new territory. It expands into the nearest available space. Every great invention is a recombination of what already exists, one step beyond the current boundary. The smartphone was not invented in the 1950s because the adjacent possibles were not yet in place. Law 52. The innovator's dilemma. Successful companies fail not because they make bad decisions, but because they make good decisions optimized for the present while disruption arrives from below. Kodak made excellent film. Right up until digital made film irrelevant. Law 53. The diffusion of innovations. New ideas spread through populations in a predictable S-curve. Innovators, early adopters, early majority, late majority, laggards. The critical crossing the chasm moment is convincing the early majority, the pragmatists who wait for proof before committing. Law 54, Carlson's Law. Innovation distributed across many self-motivated people outperforms innovation driven by central institutions. The Internet, Wikipedia, and open-source software are its clearest expressions. Autonomy produces creativity that hierarchy rarely matches. Law 55, the 10,000-hour rule. World-class expertise in most domains requires roughly 10,000 hours of deliberate practice. Note the word deliberate. Not mindless repetition, but focused work at the edge of your current ability with immediate feedback. Hours without intention don't count. 55 laws down. If this is useful, share it with one person who would benefit. That's the only algorithm that matters. Law 56. The Medici effect. Breakthrough innovations most often occur at the intersection of different disciplines, cultures, or domains. The Renaissance exploded in Florence because bankers, artists, scientists, and philosophers ate at the same tables. Diverse inputs produce unexpected outputs. Law 57, Tesla's Law. Every application has an inherent amount of irreducible complexity. The only question is who bears it, the designer or the user. The best interfaces absorb complexity invisibly. When an app feels effortless, a designer worked very hard so you wouldn't have to. Law 58. The principle of least astonishment. A system should behave in the way that least surprises the user. The best design is invisible. You never notice it, because it simply does what you expected. The moment you think, why did it do that? The design has failed. Law 59, the 1% rule. In any collaborative online community, roughly 1% of users create content, 9% interact with it, and 90% only consume. YouTube, Reddit, and Wikipedia all follow this pattern with remarkable consistency. The creators are always a tiny fraction of the audience. Law 60, Gall's Law of Complexity. A complex system that works invariably evolved from a simple system that worked. The reverse, designing complexity from scratch, almost always produces a system that does not work. Start simple, iterate toward complexity only when the simpler version proves itself. Law 61, Say's Law. Supply creates its own demand. Production of goods generates the income needed to purchase them. It was the dominant economic orthodoxy before the Great Depression showed that demand could collapse even when supply remained high. Law 62, Gresham's Law. Bad money drives out good. When two currencies circulate simultaneously, people hoard the more valuable one and spend the inferior one. The same principle applies beyond currency. In any system where quality and low quality coexist, the low quality tends to dominate circulation. Law 63, the law of supply and demand. When supply exceeds demand, prices fall. When demand exceeds supply, prices rise. It is the foundational mechanism of market economies. Simple to state, endlessly complex in practice once psychology, power, and friction are added. Law 64. The Laffer curve. There exists a tax rate somewhere between 0 and 100% that maximizes government revenue. Tax too little and revenue is low. Tax too much and economic activity collapses, also reducing revenue. The debate is always about where exactly that peak sits. Law 65. The iron law of wages. Market forces tend to push wages toward the minimum necessary for workers to survive and reproduce. 19th century economists offered it as a grim ceiling on prosperity. Modern labor economics has complicated but not fully refuted the insight. Law 66. Clarke's third law. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. It explains public bewilderment at AI, gene editing, and quantum computing, not because these things are mysterious, but because the gap between understanding and use has become enormous. Law 67. The efficient market hypothesis. In a fully efficient market, prices already reflect all available information, making it impossible to consistently outperform the market through stock selection. It's contested but foundational, and a humbling reminder that most active fund managers underperform index funds over the long term. Law 68. Veblen's law. Some goods become more desirable as they become more expensive because owning them signals status. Luxury watches, elite university degrees, and rare collectibles all follow Veblen's paradox. Demand rises with price rather than falling. Law 69. The tragedy of the commons. Shared resources are systematically overused and eventually destroyed when individuals act in self-interest without coordination. Overfishing, traffic congestion, and carbon emissions are all versions of the same structural tragedy. Law 70. The law of comparative advantage. Even if one party is better at producing everything, mutual specialization still increases total output. A lawyer who types faster than their assistant should still hire the assistant. The lawyer's time is better spent on law, where the comparative advantage is greatest. Law 71. Occam's razor. Among competing explanations, prefer the one with fewest unnecessary assumptions. It is a heuristic, not a guarantee of truth. Sometimes reality is genuinely complex, but it keeps thinking from drowning in speculation. Law 72. Popper's falsifiability principle. A claim is scientific only if it can, in principle, be proven wrong. Astrology explains everything and therefore explains nothing. No outcome could ever disprove it. Science lives and dies by its willingness to be falsified. Law 73. The law of large numbers. As a sample size grows, its average converges toward the true population average. This is why a single coin flip tells you almost nothing, but 10,000 flips reveal the coin's true bias with high confidence. Sample size is the antidote to anecdote. Law 74. Regression to the mean. Extreme outcomes tend to be followed by less extreme ones, simply due to chance. The athlete who breaks a world record this week is likely to perform closer to their average next week, not because they declined, but because exceptional performance always contains an element of luck. Law 75. Goodman's Law. No amount of past observations can logically guarantee future ones. Every sunrise we have ever seen gives us strong but never absolute confidence that the sun will rise tomorrow. This is the philosophical foundation of scientific humility. 75 down, 25 to go. Subscribe now so you never miss a series like this one. Law 76. The Sokal Affair Principle. Peer review and academic prestige can be gamed by sufficiently plausible-sounding nonsense. Physicist Alan Sokal published deliberate gibberish in a cultural studies journal to expose collapsing standards, and it was accepted. Credentials are not a substitute for rigor. Law 77, Hebb's Law. Neurons that fire together wire together. Repeated mental patterns create deeper neural pathways, the biological basis for every habit, every skill, and every language you have ever learned. Repetition is not redundancy, it is architecture. Law 78. The law of accelerating returns. The rate of technological progress is itself accelerating, meaning the change we will see in the next 20 years will dwarf the change of the previous 100. It is a confronting idea, but also the most hopeful framework for understanding why now is an extraordinary time to be alive. Law 79, the Fermi Paradox. Given the vast size and age of the universe, intelligent extraterrestrial life should be extraordinarily common, yet we see no evidence of it. The silence itself is the data point. Either life is far rarer than we assume, or something happens to intelligent civilizations before they can reach us. Law 80, the observer effect. The act of measuring a system inevitably disturbs that system. In quantum physics, this is literal and mathematically precise. In social science, people behave differently when they know they are being studied. Measurement is never neutral. Law 81, the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. The language you speak subtly shapes the categories of thought available to you. Languages that have many words for snow allow finer perceptual distinctions about snow. Learning a new language is not just acquiring a code, it is acquiring a new way of seeing. Law 82. Krashen's input hypothesis. Language is acquired when learners are exposed to comprehensible input slightly above their current level, what Krashen calls I+1. Grammar drilling without meaning-rich exposure produces test takers, not speakers. Immersion works because it delivers exactly the right level of challenge continuously. Law 83, the spacing effect. Memories are stronger and more durable when study sessions are spaced out over time rather than crammed together. Studying for 1 hour on 5 separate days produces dramatically better retention than studying for 5 hours in one sitting. The brain consolidates during rest, not during effort. Law 84, the forgetting curve. Without review, we forget roughly half of new information within a day, and up to 80% within a week. The curve is steep and ruthless. The antidote is not rereading. It is active retrieval at precisely the moment you are about to forget. Law 85, the testing effect. Being tested on material strengthens memory far more than restudying the same material. Quizzes are not just assessment tools, they are the most powerful learning intervention we know of. Close this video when it ends and try to recall 10 of these laws from memory. Law 86, Bloom's taxonomy. Learning operates at 6 ascending levels. Remember, understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, create. Surface education keeps learners at the bottom too. Genuine education pushes them toward the top. Memorizing a law is the beginning of understanding it, not the end. Law 87, the protege effect. Teaching a subject to someone else is one of the most powerful ways to consolidate your own understanding. The act of explaining forces you to find and fill gaps you didn't know you had. If you want to master something, teach it before you feel ready. Law 88, the generation effect. Information is better remembered when it is generated by the learner rather than passively received. Guessing an answer before seeing it produces stronger encoding than reading the answer directly. Struggle precedes mastery. Easy input rarely sticks. Law 89, Zipf's law of language. A small set of words accounts for the vast majority of all spoken and written language. The 1,000 most common words in English cover roughly 85% of everyday conversation. Frequency-first vocabulary learning is not laziness. It is optimal strategy. Law 90. The curse of knowledge. Once you know something deeply, it becomes genuinely difficult to imagine not knowing it. Expert teachers often fail beginners not from arrogance, but from a neurological inability to re-enter the confusion they no longer feel. The best teachers remember being lost. Law 91. Tocqueville's paradox. As conditions improve, people's expectations rise faster, producing a sense of relative deprivation even during objective progress. Revolutions often occur not during the worst times, but when things are slowly getting better, and the gap between reality and expectation becomes intolerable. Law 92. The iron law of oligarchy. All organizations, however democratic in origin, tend to develop small ruling elites over time. Power concentrates because coordination requires hierarchy, and hierarchy consolidates control. Even parties founded to fight oligarchy eventually produce one. Law 93. The Overton window. Politicians don't lead public opinion. They follow the range of what the public will accept. The way to change policy is first to change the conversation, then the window shifts, and policy follows. Ideas that seem radical today often become law within a generation. Law 94. Brandeis's Law. Transparency is the most effective corrective for corruption and abuse of power. Sunlight, as Justice Brandeis wrote, is the best disinfectant. Exposure, not just regulation, is what keeps institutions honest, because people behave differently when they know they can be seen. Law 95. Pornell's iron law of bureaucracy. In any organization, those most dedicated to the organization's survival will eventually displace those dedicated to its original purpose. The institution becomes self-serving. Schools that exist to serve administrators rather than students have completed Pornell's cycle. Law 96. The law of Jante. In Scandinavian cultures, there is a powerful, unspoken rule. Do not think you are better than anyone else. It suppresses arrogance, but also suppresses ambition, a double-edged social contract that trades excellence for equality. Law 97. The bystander effect. The more people present in an emergency, the less likely any individual is to help. Responsibility diffuses across the crowd until no one acts. The antidote is direct, specific address, not someone call an ambulance, but you, in the blue jacket, call an ambulance now. Law 98. Dunbar's number. The human brain can maintain stable social relationships with roughly 150 people. Beyond that, we rely on rules, institutions, and abstract symbols because we can no longer know everyone personally. Every company that grows past 150 employees starts to feel impersonal for structural reasons, not cultural ones. Law 99. Clarke's second law. The only way to discover the limits of the possible is to venture a little way past them into the impossible. It is the charter statement of every scientist, explorer, and language learner who ever attempted something they weren't sure they could do. Law 100. The Falkland Islands effect. Conflicts over things of little intrinsic value are often the most ferocious because they are really about identity, pride, and status, not the object itself. The fiercest arguments are rarely about what they appear to be about. Knowing this won't stop the argument. but it will tell you what the argument is actually for. 100 laws, some of them ancient, some of them discovered last century, all of them still operating, right now, in every room, in every conversation, in every decision being made anywhere in the world. The most educated people in any field are not necessarily the ones who know the most facts. They are the ones who can see through the surface of events to the patterns underneath. These laws are those patterns. If this video added something to the way you see the world, subscribe. Share it with one person who would appreciate it. And in the comments, tell me, which law hit you hardest? Keep learning, keep thinking. I'll see you in the next video.